Here to lead us in a fireside chat featuring Steve Miranda, EVP of Applications Development at Oracle, please welcome Miriam Hernandez Keiko, High-Tech Board Member, Principal and Global Head Management Consulting Practice, KPMG.
Thank you and welcome everyone. I'm always so enthusiastic when I hear the check-ins. I remember at my very first conference about 4 years ago, listening to people do it in a room was quite impressive. I think it was maybe 200 people. And by the time we did our last conference, which happened to be at Oracle, interestingly enough, our last live conference, which was in October of 2019, Steve, sponsored by Oracle. I think there were 700 people in that room introducing themselves. And now listening to it on camera is even more impressive. So I'll just say I'm a proud Mexicana, born in Guadalajara, Mexico, came to the United States when I was 9 years old, and happy to be on the high-tech board and to be sitting here today with Steve talking about digital acceleration, customer experience, leadership styles. We have a lot we want to chat about, but first let Steve introduce himself and check in.
So thank you, Miriam. Thanks for having me today. I too was excited to see those check-ins. It's fascinating. A lot has changed from work from home and this Zoom or other video technology. So it was kind of nice to see everybody's check-in, but a little bit of their personalities behind the scenes and where they were sitting and kind of context. So it was great. Myself, I'm Steve Miranda. I'm a EVP at Oracle, managing the application development. I am a second generation. All of my grandparents were born in Mexico. My parents and myself, my parents first generation in California, and I was born in California. So a proud Mexican American.
You know, it's interesting. I think when my mother was choosing where to come to in the United States, it was between California, Dallas, Texas, and Kansas City, Missouri. She picked Kansas City, Missouri, where you had to learn English or you couldn't survive because there were no Mexicans in Kansas City that spoke Spanish. There were plenty of Mexicans. And so I always say to her, Mom, how'd you end up picking Kansas City and not Los Angeles, for God's sakes? But anyway, I ended up in Los Angeles going to school there, but Kansas City was a great place to grow up before anybody from Missouri gets mad at me. So Steve, we talked a lot about what we wanted to chat about today. And I think we have some topics that go all the way from business and the new reality we're living in all the way through our own stories. And I wanted to just kick off with some of the business stuff, if you don't mind. I know Oracle well, where KPMG is a strong partner of Oracle's, but I really want to hear from you, sort of the guy at the middle of this. What is really your vision for the evolution of Oracle's product line?
Okay. So I think at Oracle, think of us, we're obviously a large company, but to try to simplify it, we have a technology business, which has traditionally been centered around the database, and now is the database plus our Gen 2 cloud services. So basically infrastructure, hosting, cloud service. That's one half. The part where I'm focused on and that my team works on is the application side. Again, we were traditionally on-premise applications like e-business suite and PeopleSoft and Siebel. But over the last decade or so, we've re-platformed, really rewrote things from the ground up, becoming a SaaS application. So big Oracle, there's really a big shift from, we've always been good at managing data, we've always been good at infrastructure, but really shifting from that traditional on-premise model to a cloud model, which involves not only product changes, which we've engineered to do, but also changing from a product company to a service company in the cloud. Now, in our space, our growth strategy is really in applications, particularly enterprise applications. It's kind of a new generation coming up. Most of our customers and most of our competitors' customers made their decisions, large ones, really around Y2K. And these were when on-premise products got their foothold, as your partnership with KPMG helped us along with many others and helped our competitors as well, implementing kind of pre-Y2K. Well, for many reasons, technologies involved, business processes involved, and the combination of those really now is a time when companies are moving to the cloud and transforming business models. So in high tech, you guys are all familiar with technology, a variety of sorts, particularly centered around the cloud. But what's also happening in enterprise business is businesses are changing. Lots of companies are moving from product companies to service companies. Lots of companies are trying to become the disruptor or trying to prevent keeping up with a disruptor in their industry, and really fundamentally changing what they offer. And what that means to us at Oracle as that data provider and that infrastructure provider is they need a lot of new business processes to manage that change, and a lot more nimbleness on an ongoing basis, because no longer are we in a world where companies stay very static. Companies are much more dynamic than they used to be. So we really feel very strongly as this shift is happening, both technology and business-wise, our SaaS applications are the perfect fit. And that's really what's growing our business and what's growing our market share. And we hope to take us forward in the future as well.
It's interesting to me. I sort of have a two-pronged question, but just a thought as you were talking. I hear some of your fellow technology companies that we also partner with. It's a big ecosystem. Yeah. I hear some of them say that they're really the future because they're much more around the customer and much more around managing the enterprise and all of the workflow among the enterprise, which, by the way, I'm a big believer in having a connected enterprise. But I'm just wondering, from a Oracle perspective, don't you see yourself in the customer experience business and the workflow management business? We don't hear Oracle talk about that as much, but yet I know you have a strong belief around that.
Well, definitely. So I'd say two parts. One is in the customer business for sure. And what we try to take the approach is try to give customers as much end-to-end business solutions. I mean, we're a large organization. We have a large portfolio. So when we take the customer, we like to take it all the way from inception, really, or pre-inception from a customer, whether a prospect or a lead or an unknown, from advertising on through to what's today known as the Salesforce automation process or the customer experience process, but also through the back-end fulfillment in very integrated fashion. So it's not only in some companies, how do you find the customer, how do you track that customer and sell to them, but also once you sell to them, how do you fulfill those goods? If you're a manufacturer, how do you manufacture the goods? What's the most efficient delivery process? Which again is another extremely dynamic area of change. So we do look at that focus on the customer process and try to take it as end-to-end business solutions as we can.
I love that idea of fulfillment, right? Because if you think about customer experience, it isn't just about the experience they have in the moment that they're connecting or ordering a product or calling in a service call. It's how do you fulfill on that promise all the way through. So I love that perspective that you're bringing to it. It's, I think, critical if our mutual clients are really going to develop sticky customer relationships, if they don't have that fulfillment piece worked out, man, it's almost worse than making good customer promises if you can't fulfill them, right?
Well, one of my favorite examples, I think all of us have this experience, is when you have a repair at your home, and let me not pick on any industry, but you have a repair person come into your home. So we have a product that's really expertise at scheduling the expert to have that time of arrival and doing that calendar with the customer. But it does us no good if the person who you scheduled to arrive doesn't have the skill set you need to make the repair. It also doesn't do you any good if the parts they might need aren't available to them in the location when they need it, in the time that they need it. So we've all, I think, had this experience that you get the scheduling process. First of all, it's not exact. You wait hours at home for the person to arrive, and then either A, they're the wrong person, or worse, they're the right person, but then parts not available. Let me go back and reschedule, and you go through the process again. So it's really that end-to-end fulfillment and looking at the entire business process, which we think we bring some unique perspectives to help that customer experience on behalf of our constituents.
So let's turn to where we are in the reality today. We've lived through a year, almost exactly a year of shutdown and the pandemic in the U.S. And hopefully we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. I know that this, we read lots of reports about digital acceleration. We're living it every day. What has this pandemic and this whole experience of the last year said to you? Has it changed your mind? Has it changed the way that you're thinking about the application development and how you grow your business?
No, I mean, I'll give you some examples. It's been interesting, very unexpectedly, at least to me. I would say that the last year has accelerated things. Now, the reason for acceleration varied depending on the customer and the industry. We had a customer who was a hospital in New York, and they actually accelerated and went live with a human capital solution during the pandemic, really at the heart of it. And that was really to better serve their first line, the caregivers, and give them better service from an HR perspective. We have another distribution organization who was part of the distribution of PPE and some of the early response to COVID. So they had a two-part problem. One was they had this massive acceleration in demand due to COVID. And two is they had this shutdown in various places and parts of the world, which made it more challenging in terms of import export and what they were allowed to do. So not only do they have a spike in demand, but they had previously unknown challenges in terms of their supply chain and how to actually fulfill it. So they actually accelerated the solution. We had other customers in the hospitality suite, this hospitality area, that had a slowdown. I mean, there was no travel, people weren't staying in hotels, especially early. So they actually used it as an opportunity to accelerate some of their infrastructure work in terms of IT, because they said, without guests and without a slower time, they took advantage of that, which again accelerated. And I think, frankly, from a people perspective, and it's a little bit unfortunate, there was less travel, there was less vacations. And so, projects were actually moving at a faster clip than we had seen previously. All of that, to your question now, did it change our viewpoint? We've been saying for quite some time that the reason we felt our SaaS and our cloud solution was effective was the speed of change and this increased speed of change. I mean, this was in a very unfortunate way, in a very global way, but I think we've all experienced the speed of change in the last year that no one could have expected and predicted. But while we certainly don't think that the change is going to be as disruptive and as negative as the one we just are going through, but as far as technology allowing us to change faster, we don't think that's going to stop. And that's what we fundamentally believe.
It's interesting to me as I look at different clients that I work with, this digital acceleration, this accelerating of projects, this acceleration of budget, right, and really focusing more money on these projects. It's very interesting to me how innovative and how it's turned on a whole different way of thinking about things for many companies, right? So where you thought something was not possible. I mean, if you really look at major companies, it was a number of days before we were all set up to work remote, right? I mean, who would have thought? And yes, there were issues with supply chain and call centers and this and that. But in terms of getting employees ready to work and be productive away from the office, it seemed like it turned on a dime, at least with all the major companies. So that turned to me into more innovation and more time to think about, okay, since we're faster, what can we think about there's no roadblock to doing what we need to do. I don't know. I think there's something there about the way that people started thinking about the art of the possible, because that acceleration itself and the ability to turn the way we were working into a remote environment so quickly. Did you see that? I think there's been a lot of innovation in the last year, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually been amazed by it. Like I said, I at least personally was pleasantly surprised at the speed of innovation, at just the resiliency of people across many different industries of very quickly adapting, everything just in the way we work. I mean, if you would have told me at that conference in October that, we're going to have this in a year and a half, except no one's going to be there in person. I'm not sure if I would have believed that. And here we are, with this tremendous audience and able to do this. And unfortunately, I think it's a normal part of our day now. So the adaptability and change, I think that when people see that, I think you're right, that just spawns new ideas. And new ideas really, once you see the art of the possible and live through it the way we have, those ideas really take hold.
Its technology is almost limitless, right? At this point, I remember back in the day when I worked at Bell Communications Research at Bell Labs, and scientists used to tell me, "Hey, this is nothing. Wait to see 20 years from now how quickly we're going to be able to turn technology over." And I would say, "Oh, okay." And then, sure enough, it just, Moore's law. It just keeps getting faster. So I want to turn. We've been talking about this remote working and the applicability of technology and the speed of change. What about the people side of it, right? What about? I'll tell you my observation, and I'm interested in yours. There was like this peak. I know my own personal. I was traveling a lot. Suddenly, I was able to be home. I could have dinner with my family. I was not having to get on an airplane. It was fabulous. I could walk every day while I was on a conference call. And then like 7 months in, when you realize this isn't going to end anytime soon, people are saying now, "Oh my goodness, I'm on video calls 12, 13 hours. I don't have time to think." At least I used to think when I walked from one office to another. What are you seeing at Oracle in terms of the impact on this remote working on your employees?
Well, I think we're seeing much of what you just described, which is the Zoom fatigue or the video fatigue. I don't know how much of that is the work component, but the work component added with just the the uncertainty of life and the uncertainty of this pandemic, just adding to everybody's stress. And when that stress is global, it becomes very, very difficult. But I think what we expect to happen, first of all, we're trying to be very cautious and careful with the employees and everybody's health and safety. So we're not doing any kind of a rush. But my own personal view is that, first of all, I'm looking forward to getting back to some work in the office time. And then secondly, I do think that would be necessary for a lot of groups. I think that for our team and for many teams, we knew each other. We've been working in person. We knew each other over the years. And when you take that and shift it to remote, it's one thing because people, et cetera. As teams grow and as new teams come on board, I think it becomes a little bit more difficult without any in-person contact. I mean, I know before the pandemic, as you would have clients or you'd have remote sites, and you would go on a visit, and something changed. Even a day or an afternoon of meeting somebody in person, talk to them in person, even if it was on a phone call afterwards, there was a different relationship that you had. And so I think where we end up is because of both the Zoom fatigue that you talked about and some of these other things that are, the softer side of how you get to know people and interact with people. My personal opinion is we'll end up in some blended reality of the two. Again, but I wouldn't have predicted we had this much success on work from home or remote in the first place. So, maybe I'll be surprised, but I'm fairly certain we're going to need some kind of a blending. And it's nice now that we have this option. I think it, opens up to, geographically opens things up. It opens up to different size customers, innovation, like a lot of the playing field just gets leveled because of the technology.
I agree with you. I think we're going to end up in some sort of hybrid situation. Same for us, same for me. Once you have the trust with a team or with a client, and it's easy to transact remotely this way. But I worry about our, people that we're hiring into teams and they don't really know the organization and the organization doesn't really know them. How do you retain that talent? How do you grow that talent? How do you help them develop their careers? So I think that there will be answers to how to do some of that remotely. I know really smart people are thinking about that right now. But I do think there's going to have to be some hybrid in order to have that human interaction. You just can't get away from the fact that at the end of the day, we're humans and that there's some live human interaction in a conference room that you need in order to blend and mix and match and get to know each other and trust each other. I do wonder, just on this topic of what's happened over the last year. We see a lot of information out there. We at High Tech read out on this at one of our conferences, but you see research and studies that say that as young people are coming into the workforce, and due to all of the pandemic, the social justice movement over the last year plus, that potential employees and recruits are really looking to corporations to see what their value system is and to see, hey, do my values match up with Oracle's, or do they match up with KPMG's? And so you see corporations spending a lot more time on those type of social justice, equality, inclusion, diversity, sustainability. I'm just wondering if your perspective on, what can corporations actually do to make sure that there is a blending of that? I mean, corporations are in the business, in the making profit and building business. How do you blend that with having, being able to live your values, I guess, is the question. Is there a place for corporations to do that?
Well, yeah. So first of all, I think yes is the answer. And then I think I'll speak, Oracle participates in a number of different ways. But before I get to that, let me just say, it's not only for the social justice aspect. We believe strongly, and we have data that shows evidence that our diverse teams are more effective. They have lower attrition. They produce better products. They're more innovative than teams that are less diverse. So, in terms of your blending, yes, corporations are in it to make a profit, but we believe pretty strongly, not only is it the right thing to do, having this focus on diversity, but it's also effective for the company and effective for our customers in terms of how we present to our customers and the products we build and services we provide for our customers. So not only is it the right thing to do, we think it's the better thing to do. Now, where we focus mostly Oracle, we've had a lot of focus on underrepresented groups. And this is a little bit Oracle's main focus, but it's also my own personal belief, particularly in high tech, particularly in underrepresented groups like the Hispanic background, like African Americans, like women in high tech. It's really a gap early in the cycle. And Oracle has a tremendous focus on education and our investment in education towards that social justice. In fact, I don't know if we are now the only, but we were the first company that had a public high school. It's actually on our campus at Oracle headquarters. It's right there. And we donated land, but it's a public high school. And that's just one part of our commitment to education. And our focus on is not only high-tech education in general, but specifically targeting those underrepresented areas to try to, have more qualified candidates into the general pool. Again, which, at least in our company and, most of this group that focus on high technology, those underrepresented areas, starting early, we think is key, and getting that early education, particularly not only for Hispanics, but for African Americans and women. Or girls at a younger age. It's just a tremendous, tremendous problem. And that's where our focus is. Now, there's many other things. There's climate areas that Oracle has a lot of investment in, and other social responsible act. But if I pick one, I think what Oracle's most proud of, and where I personally think the bigger impact will be towards that diversity, is in the focus on education.
Yeah, it's a passion of mine. I would say that a lot of where I spend my time when I want to give back is around education and KPMG as well. That's where we focus, is on education at different levels. And then also just helping to create the next generation of leaders, which I think that in the roles that you and I have, and many of us in high tech have, that's a responsibility that we have to help create the next generation of leaders, right? Speaking of that, leadership style. Yeah. I'm curious to ask you to share a little bit about your beliefs and your leadership style, and what's worked for you and what hasn't worked for you.
Yeah, I think that's probably what I can do, is just kind of what's worked for me. I don't pretend to be, a management guru or leadership guru any style, but what I've seen effective for me and in the group is, there's lots of different ways that you can lead, and lots of different ways that you can manage a group. But all of us have different personalities and bring different things to the table. I mean, go back to those check-ins. You can just see people's personality from how they introduce themselves and can go forward. And what I found is that when you are just open to and true to your personality in your leadership style, I think that comes through. And I think that whether people like it or agree with every decision or don't agree with every decision, if they know where you're coming from and they know that that's truly you and that's your belief and you're doing the right thing, for the customer and for the employees and for the company, my view is that you get much better response and become a much better leader that way. And then personally for me, in terms of what works, boy, it just, if you weren't really, true to your own personal style and the way you work and what you like to do and handle yourself, just be exhausting. You just can't, just like, here's how I am, and this is what I present myself as, and I try to lead in that way. It's not the same style as some other people. They may, dive into more details or less details or have a different dynamic in how they deal with people. But, hopefully, what I try to do, what I think I do, is if you're dealing with me in a work related situation, you're dealing with me outside of work, I think you're going to see something very similar. And I think that what that gives is, a level of consistency that people can rely on. And I think it's easier for you as a leader. So I try not to guide people towards, follow this person or follow that person or try this style, but rather adapt some of those key things in leadership to your own personality, your own work style and how you communicate with people.
It's I was having a conversation with one of my mentees this week, actually. And she was asking me about, what do you do in a political situation when, she's been recently promoted. She has a big job at a Fortune 10 company. She's a dynamo. And she said, oh my God, at this level, the level of politics that go on, what do I do? How do I handle it? And I said to her, first thing you need to do is be comfortable with how you're going to react to it. Everyone reacts to politics differently. And it's this thing about being true to yourself and your own values that I think is so important. And then we went through a whole discussion about tactics that you can use. I told her my experience is that if you take the politics in the room and you deal with the factual aspects of it and you give your opinion in the room where the politics are being played, and you don't take this outside of the discussion or outside of the room, and you really show your own beliefs and your own values in front of everyone, that just seems to work better. And you take the politics right out of it being part of who you are or part of what you get involved in. And I think it's a lot of what you're saying. It's really being true to yourself. It's much easier to maneuver things like internal politics, which we know all corporations, all firms have it, but it's how you react to it and how you give it importance or don't that I think is really critical. And she laughed at the end of it. She said, well, when you would, handle it in a room and be, push back or give your opinion, how did you do it? And I said, well, probably too strongly sometimes, but really you have to do it in a way that sounds like you're talking and not someone else is talking. And I think that builds trust among the people in the room with you.
Well, I think trust is a key word. I think respect is the other key word. Is that, I've been fortunate in my career, but almost every promotion that I or other people get, you're in a peer group, and then somebody gets promoted, and then you're managing that peer group. And it's very clear to me that when, if you're playing politics, it becomes a very, very difficult group to manage afterwards, because that peer group all of a sudden knows that and they feel that. But if you got a level of respect and trust in that group, then all of a sudden, if you become the manager, you become the lead of that group.
We lost you. I can't hear you. Sorry, I can't hear you. Not sure what happened. No one can hear you. Let me just, while we're figuring out, Steve's, are you back?
Better?
There you go. Yes, you're back. So we didn't hear what you said about being in the room and people having respect and trust. I was just going to start to.
Can you hear me now, Marion?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear us? So while we get Steve's microphone figured out, can you hear us? Let me take a question. We have a question coming in from our audience.
Okay.
The question is, do you think that allowing employees to be 100% remote going forward would be a competitive advantage for attracting and retaining talent?
Maybe. I think that having a lot of flexibility is going to become a table stakes for attracting and retaining talent. I think 100%, as I said before, is probably overstating things a little bit. Because now in certain situations, maybe if somebody's in an area where travel becomes very difficult and they're in a personal situation where that becomes difficult, then in those cases, yes. But I think I'd probably more focus on flexibility than the 100% aspect, because I do think that having some level of that personal interaction, but a lot of flexibility, I actually would go further on that part of the statement. I think it's become table stakes already for competition in terms of retaining and attracting.
I agree with you, because I don't know that every potential employee wants to be 100% remote. I know people in the consulting business don't. They always say, well, I didn't get into the consulting business to sit at a desk all day. So yeah. I think flexibility, you're absolutely right. I think that's the table stakes. There's another question specifically for you around HCM.
Yep.
And talking about that yesterday, Workday spoke about shifting their product line to be more journey-based. Yep. In order to really support evolving tech needs due to COVID. And, the question is, how do you see your applications, specifically HCM, shifting in that direction to help your clients better support their employees with a more positive experience?
So I'm not sure what Workday calls their journeys, but we have a journey capability as well, very similar. I don't know that, I think, again, COVID maybe has magnified it, but we've had some capability or believe that this has been a case for a while. So, you hear about the gig economy. And so we've had, not only journeys, but capabilities with HCM to allow people to post gigs, if you will, or part-time assignments, to allow a lot more, within company dynamic and movement, and even have companies having individuals or employees sign up for gigs part-time while they're in their current role, because some companies have that where you take a percentage of your time, et cetera. So I think COVID has added some things to it, maybe accelerated it, but I think it's been a trend that's been happening in Workforce for quite some time, and that's where our HCM product has been there to allow that flexibility into, let's say, a more modern but certainly evolving work style of less the traditional, here's my job, I move from A to B to C, but more, here's my job, but I've got an idea, more dynamic teams and blended teams. So I think journey is a part of that for the individuals component, but I think also, the quote unquote gig economy and those type of things is where our HCM is taking it, and where we see, the workforce going.
And I think the other part of that is making sure that as you're working through what customer experience looks and feels like, that you're partnering that up with employee experience, right? And the interactions between employees and customers being so critical. Therefore, they need to be feeling and seeing a similar experience. And I think that's also a very important part of this. There is a question about organizations helping or empowering ERG groups. Yeah. And employee-led grassroots efforts around diversity and inclusion. Thoughts on that?
Well, we're lucky at Oracle. The ERG groups are, really employee grassroots driven, or started and then grown and kind of run. So we find is very effective. What we are trying to do more and more from the corporate perspective is incorporate those groups. again, not only for the education we talked about before, but also in recruiting. So a lot of the ERG groups have either foundations like we're speaking at today for high tech, or there's different, groups at universities that focus on different groups. And what we find is when you have awareness of those grassroots groups within the employee out in your overall corporate presence, it really helps, because then people see, okay, here's what's happening in this company. As you talked about earlier, here's the values of not only the company, but the people. So we do the best we can to promote those groups. We obviously support them corporately, but frankly, much like high tech, with all the people who introduced themselves before, it's the people who make these groups and it's the people who make them happen. So I don't know, it could be successful without a grassroots push from the employees and a real belief there.
I agree with you on that. And I also find, having been very involved in both the Hispanic and the women's network at KPMG, I find that it also has to have a little bit of teeth. It can't just be a social gathering, although that's good and common experience is good. Where I found that, for instance, I was on the Women's Advisory Board at KPMG, when we actually took on issues that we could help KPMG progress and change, it was a much more dynamic group that pulled in people, and women actually wanted to be part of it and take time out to do it. And I think that's generally true, that when they're more action oriented and you take on, an activity or a task or something you want to change within the organization and have a positive impact on, I think they tend to also be more successful. So I know that we only have 5 minutes left. You and I talked about the fact that we were both technology leaders who happen to be Hispanic, right? We didn't pick to be Hispanic. We are Hispanic, but we did pick to be in technology. That was something we chose. What do you think in terms of your own story as being a tech leader, being interested, and I know you really have a very long career, an important career at Oracle. What did you see work for you to achieve these career ambitions and this love for technology that you've had?
Well, long, yes, career, important. I don't know. We'll see. Let others judge that.
I didn't mean to say long as in like, oh my goodness, so long.
Oh no, it's been long. It's been long. No,
I would say you have a pretty important role at Oracle.
I think, in seriousness, I think that, again, what I've tried to do is, focus on the broader corporate goal, not get into the individual politics. And then importantly, earning the respect of peers, and having that respect of peers, so that when I've been fortunate and or, in the right place at the right time to have opportunities and presented themselves, like I say, I manage a large group, and we make lots of decisions if people leave or if we need to progress and put different leaders in place. I will tell all of you, we always have the conversation of who's the best person, but also what's the effect on the entire team. And if you've got two people and they're very close, but one, the team is going to react very negative to, and the other, the team's going to react very positive to, it's a very obvious and easy decision. And we just, almost never try. I mean, now we may get some wrong along the way, but certainly that's our thought process. And with me, I'm heavily reliant, or now totally reliant, on the team that we have, and a trust system and support system we have amongst the team. And so that is what, early in my career, a mentor of mine, introduced me to the concept of people equity. He said, people think of equity and think, okay, I'm going to get stock or get this. He said, you build people equity. And, he kind of convinced me that I actually had more impact where I was in the group that I was and trying to move around, because I had gained a level of trust and a level, of working relationship with people. And that people equity, I was able to be very valuable there, more valuable there, because I get more things done, in that group that I have than I could if I, up and shifted away. And so I think just, I'm not saying that you shouldn't shift or people shouldn't go there, but I think keeping in mind that investment in people equity in terms of overall career goals, and having that respect and trust, it plays out over time.
Yeah, I love that. People equity, respect, trust, people equity, collaboration, working towards the bigger good. I think that about sums up. I know that we're getting ready to move to our next speaker. Steve, it's been a great pleasure to talk with you, and I hope we get to talk again off camera.
Miriam, thank you very much, and thanks for everybody for having me. Truly
it was
a pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think it's now going to our next speaker.